Ahoy! Happy New Year and welcome to Music Ally Focus with me, Music Ally's managing editor, Joe Sparrow. Now, at the start of 2025, we published one of our most popular podcasts of the entire year when we asked Liam James Ward, who's CEO, co-founder of the content strategy studio, something, to appear on the podcast and look ahead into the year's upcoming marketing trends. Now, never let it be said that Music Ally Focus likes anything more than pushing against an open door. So when we had the opportunity to get Liam back on the show, we said, of course, yes. And there was also an extra incentive because something was awarded the Best Agency Award in the Music Ally Marketing Awards for 2025. And thus, in this special year-beginning episode of Music Ally Focus, we will look beyond the bland and get clarity on the key changes and surprising developments in digital and social music marketing that emerged last year in 2025, and look and find out what you can do yourself in 2026, whether you're a big budget high flyer or a scrappy and ambitious DIYer. We'll talk about fan accounts, the atomization of content, and crafting fun and sticky videos that stretch the idea of authenticity into exciting new places. Liam will also talk about clipping, communities, and crafting constellations of content. Try saying that quickly. And we will talk about how marketers probably already instinctively know the ideal strategy that they need to take for their artist and that artist audience. It's, as ever, a fascinating and fast-paced interview. So let's go straight over to Liam now. And I'm very happy to welcome to the podcast Liam James Ward from Something, a man who I met in various places around Europe last year as he tirelessly hit the conference circuit. Liam, good to see you.
Good to see you, Mr. Sparrow. Good to be speaking to Music Ally. And yeah, you're right. I think if there's one thing I can take away from 2025, it's that if I go to Germany, I will see you.
Yes, that's right. I've seen him in numerous places. Now, we had you on the podcast last year doing quite a similar thing, which is looking forward to the year and trying to identify some marketing trends. And it went down so well, we decided to get you back again. And here you are. So thank you for joining us. Now, can you, for people who, just to set the context before we start, can you just give us a bit of sort of outline of who you are, what you do, and what something focuses on in the marketing sense, and then we'll get stuck into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Liam James Ward. I'm the CEO, co-founder of a business called Something. You know, a name like that normally means a lot of explanation. We are a content production studio. Essentially, we do social media strategy. We manage artists' social media. We produce a hell of a lot of content of varying degrees. You know, we do music video level visuals all the way down to kind of iPhone stuff as well. And, you know, over the past probably 24 months or so, we've become one of the foremost teams in the fan engagement world. So we own, operate, manage, work with so many different fan accounts, probably well into 400, 500 different accounts now. That stems across HQs, fan accounts, meme pages, genre pages, culture pages, whatever you want to call them.
So that is all the sort of, it's like a constellation of content that is around an artist or around a music event or something like that, that helps people engage with it. Is that really?
Yeah, I love that word constellation. I've never heard that before, actually, to use this. And I think that's bang on what it is. You know, we're in this world now where there's so much conversation around the atomization of content, right? We're trying to make everything so bite-sized and, you know, really kind of machine gun spray stuff out into the algorithm and kind of fight against the algorithm by using it against itself. And,
right.
You know, something that we started doing a little while ago, essentially, was for a handful of the artists that we were working with that had such a big plethora of content, we would make what we essentially called overflow channels as just an avenue to get more content about them into the world without it having to come from them. You know, is an artist always going to post a meme about themselves? Does that necessarily fit into their tone for it to come from them? Maybe not. But for it to come via some sort of HQ or fan account, it probably could make sense, you know? And that's something we started doing probably about 2.5 years ago now. And then around 1.5 years ago, we started taking it really seriously because it was really clear that social media strategies were, while important, you know, obviously running an artist's own socials are always going to be important. As a means of amplification and discovery, using so many other accounts was really starting to be what moves the needle.
Yeah. I mean, that leads me nicely into my first question, which is a look back on 2025 and trying to identify those changes and evolutions in that sort of digital social space. But so let's start with this idea of the sort of fan account, the HQ, this extra content, if you like. This is something you've really doubled down on. So Why is it the thing you double down on? Why is it working so well? Why is it what people want?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways you can look at this, in my opinion. I mean, starting just purely logistically, if I'm the biggest Charlie XCX fan in the world and you're at a Charlie XCX concert, as I'd expect, Mr. Sparrow,
Yes.
and you're posting 50 pieces of content on TikTok, once again, as I'd expect from you,
Mhm.
just even if I'm the biggest fan in the world, the algorithm's not necessarily going to serve me 50 pieces of content from one account, you know? Whereas if you had 50 different accounts, which, 50 is a bit extreme, but if you had a whole bunch of different accounts that were seeding all this content out into the world, to actually get all of that content into my feed as a fan, it's more likely if it's spread across different accounts. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
That's kind of the main foundational core of it. There's another side of it there where, again, I've kind of already said it. Some things just don't make sense coming from the artist. But do they have a place in the strategy? Absolutely. And, there's definitely kind of insidious ways that you can look at this, but and don't get me wrong, there are also companies that are doing it in slightly insidious ways. We've heard of and seen other businesses out there that are using terminology that we'd never agree with, or using things like VPNs or phone farms or AI in a way that we wouldn't necessarily do. I want to be 100% clear. Like everyone who we work with in the fan account space are genuine, real people. They're
Yeah.
making real content. They are posting about artists that they're genuinely fans of, and therefore, if anything, we're just, just slightly getting to the broader conversation here. We're just leaning with how social media and music marketing is changing. Ultimately, we're more than ever in a world that when somebody as a content producer or a musician or a filmmaker or even a comedian or a podcaster, let's say, they
Yeah.
offer something out into the world, it kind of then is no longer there. It really can be ripped up into tiny little pieces and reimagined in so many different ways. It belongs to the fan base. The number one single in the UK right now is End of Beginning by Joe, who, we've been very fortunate to be working with for quite a while now in this exact way. And, that song came out, what, 2 years ago now. And I think Joe definitely wasn't the person at the forefront of that marketing campaign, pushing it and making it happen. It's the fan base and the internet and the world that have made that happen. And there are so many other great examples that we could use around that, but
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get into them over the next 25, 30 minutes.
Yeah. So, and what from this kind of approach? What are again looking back over the last year? What are you hearing in terms of what fans want? We're sort of hearing and get out of it. You've outlined some quite persuasive stuff there around how it works well for for messaging and for disseminating stuff out and doing it in a way that feels right. But like what are the benefits from a fan perspective? Because it seems to be working at all levels here.
Yeah, I mean, fans want to feel included, right? That's been a part of this thing that we call the music industry for the longest time. And I know when we spoke a year ago, we were talking a lot about how the industry was so hyper focused on super fans and so onwards,
Mm.
right? And I think at that point in time, the super fan based model and all the different things that were coming out in your guys' lovely publication from labels about that sort of thing at the time were essentially treating fans as cash cows. And if anything, actually, I'd say this is almost a way of them kind of like pushing back in a way that
Right.
it's like, no, we're not just here to be milked, we're here to be part of the conversation. Again, we own this conversation. We're part of it. We're making it happen. And, that goes all the way up to the fact that more now than ever, I feel like genuine fans of music are executives and professionals in this industry, which, when I first started, that it
Mm.
almost was embarrassing, or it kind of like cost you cool points to actually be a fan of the music you were working on. Now it's one of the biggest things that anyone's going to look for when they're hiring, which you think was obvious,
Right.
but
Yeah.
hey, for some reason. But it's definitely now more than ever, definitely part of the conversation. And I think there are great people out there starting up even their own businesses that are doing this, like genuine music fans who are maybe not even out of university yet, who are starting to go, hey, actually, you know what? I understand social, I understand marketing. I can really help make this happen for you.
And you mentioned there about sort of content creation across the whole stack, all the way from like these high quality videos all the way down to this fan led content and creation. Is that you know is that something that you that builds vertically like that you do sort of you can sort of start with one thing and build through, or is it something that's kind of a bit more nimble, like with this case you've just mentioned with Joe, and like you've got an old song, you can quickly assemble a strategy that allows you to get this kind of fan led content out there.
Yeah. I mean, there's never any one size fits all, right? And I think whether you want to go down and up, or whether you want to start at the top and go down, or you want to go left, right, sideways, zigzag, all of it on that kind of map of different content. There are artists out there who they're putting out really incredible polished stuff. I'm talking a lot at the moment about how maybe we're in this post authentic world now, where
Mm.
that was the word that kind of did everything to death, and now with artists like McGee and artists like Tu Hollis coming through, who maybe have a bit more superstardom or mystique, or just like a little bit more cool points to them than ever before. Um, they are putting out stuff that's kind of higher production and lives within a world, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of micro atomization is happening around them. Again, that could be something that their teams are doing with teams like mine, but just to say I don't work with either of those artists, not yet
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm sure they might have a team who are doing that sort of thing. But the core stuff being put out into the world, it's a bit different. And then going the complete opposite direction. We're what 6 years away from where like when COVID kicked off now, and
Mm.
COVID really was the purveyor of a lot of people who were digital creators, social media influencers, becoming musicians. Not casting comment or judgment on that in any way. I think that there are a lot of talented people who come out of that world. I mean, Justin Bieber was a YouTuber first, right? And I
Mm.
think therefore they were coming out of a world of posting loads of very relatable content, phone first, so onwards. I saw a piece of content the other day where someone had kind of announced that actually over the past 12 months they've been experimenting with doing some of their videos handheld and some of their videos with a professional setup, and the handheld stuff was massively outranking. So it is
Right.
still part of it. But then, those artists who have come out of that world, they probably do need a little bit more help to make them look like a superstar, to put them in like a big budget music video. Because, again, after COVID, we did have that weird little place where all those digital creators turned musicians started jumping up on a stage, and some of them didn't quite make it.
Yeah. Um, so, I mean, yes. Well, let's look a bit back at 2025 then, because what the word you mentioned there, authenticity, was the one that was just sort of one of those things that was just a through line for everything in marketing last year. It was, as I was reading through the campaigns of the year 2025 report that we publish every December, that was one of the two things that was just omnipresent, right? And it was what
Mhm.
people were aiming for. But the approach you're saying doesn't necessarily mean it has to attach to authenticity. It can be this sort of hyper iconic, polished approach as well. Um,
Yeah.
what what other things did you see before we start looking ahead? What other things did you see that were through lines of all the different work that you were either doing or looking at last year?
Well, let's zoom in on that word authentic for a minute, right? I think
Yeah.
when artists would be rocking up to whether it was some sort of talk or panel from very many social media experts, or whether it was a meeting with their record label, that's where the word authentic would get thrown around all the time. And I think a lot of people did probably mean it as like, be yourself. And,
Mm,
ultimately, a lot of early stage artists don't know who they are as an artist yet.
mm,
And I think that's a really complicated piece of work to go through, is understanding who you are, understanding what the world you're building is, understanding who you're trying to connect with. That is a really big piece of artist development that has been missed out for a few years now. And a lot of the time actually that onus ends up being on us, where we work with brand new artists, where we have to kind of help figure them out and figure out who their story is. And that's where things become authentic. So I think the word authentic is a little bit less now be your true human self. And it's actually figure out what the world is that you're trying to build, and is it authentic to that? Because,
right.
if you want to be Slipknot and give yourself masks and fake names and everything and completely live within a theater performance, you can do that. And as long as your marketing and the content you're putting out and so on is authentic to essentially that manifesto and that set of rules that has built your world, then it is authentic. You don't have to
Right.
necessarily be yourself, because maybe we're all a bit too bored of seeing artists out on the toilet talking about their bowel movements. We want to actually, believe in a Ziggy Stardust again. You know,
Yeah. So that idea of authenticity, which is thrown around very freely, but actually it feels like, from what you're saying, is it's more about, people are able to sense if an artist is trying to be everyone's favorite flavor or everything to everybody. It's like it's more about, are they communicating a clear sort of tranche of ideas and concepts and who they are, and then like you either fit in it or you don't. It's that kind of clarity.
Exactly. So it's about doubling down on your niche, right? And that word niche has kind of become a bit more of a buzzword in and of itself. And you're kind of referring back to the campaigns of the year report, right? That you guys put out, which you
Mm.
very kindly shout us out a bunch of times, including Agents of the Year. So thank you so much for that. So I mean, even just looking to the campaigns that we had in that, I think it is that. It's hopefully if you look at any of the 5 or 6 campaigns that we had that were featured in that report, if you put them next to each other, it wasn't templated, it wasn't boilerplate. We didn't roll out the same
Mm.
strategy over and over again. We really genuinely delved into the lore of the fans and the lore of the artist and the fan base itself. And if you, for example, the Wombats and the Hives, we've worked with the Hives, are probably one of our longest running artists that we've worked with. And I personally worked with the Wombats long before I even started this company. And those 2 campaigns, I don't know if we necessarily did anything particularly revolutionary in terms of like new features or new platforms or anything, but we told a story really well. We built a world really well. And that doesn't come from just hiring a social media agency who jump in, tell you all the best practices, do a bit of social admin, and just kind of like regurgitate the same trends newsletter that everyone else is working from. You've got to have a genuine, real, deep knowledge and appreciation for the fan base and lore of that artist. And, I think that's just more and more important than ever. So I think of all the kind of different things that the successes that have been seen across 2025, I think that's where it is, And I think to tie it back to what I was saying earlier, one of our biggest successes, probably so far as a company, was helping break Alex Warren. The breakthrough that he had last year was
Mm.
pretty stellar. We worked with him from pretty early in his music career. There's a whole story there that maybe I won't go into now, but long story short, about how he felt like he wasn't being taken seriously as a musician because everyone just saw him as this goofy creator, TikToker or whatever. And we did a lot of work to kind of change that. And, talking about that kind of authenticity and so onwards and that deep appreciation of that lore, so much of the work we were doing was using fan account strategy to be understanding what was going on in the tippity tip of that bottom funnel of those people who were super hardcore into him, and then using these pages to surface up the stuff that was really sticking, engaging, being highly shareable up into that kind of wider, that very, very top of funnel of people who followed him on socials but didn't care about his music. And honestly, you saw him go from like 500,000 to 12 million Spotify monthly listeners in something like 3 or 4 months. So I think if you
Mm.
can really stick that piece and keep that lore and keep that world building, keep playing by the same rules that you built in the first place and adapting as needed, that's where you see some real wins,
So that's the stuff that's working sort of as we look at the end of last year. As you look ahead into 2026, of course, what you've just mentioned is going to continue going forwards. But do you sort of see any shifts coming in the following year?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them. I think following on from what I just said, is the atomization of content going to just suddenly stop because the clock struck 12 and now there's a new marketing buzzword to come in? Probably not. It's going to continue. It's going to evolve. We've been really interestingly working on more and more campaigns where our fan engagement team and our content teams are working together, where we're making content specifically to go out onto fan accounts. So we're not just using music videos and Reddit clips and podcast clips and whatever else to surface that onto a fan account. We're making content specifically for those fan accounts. And that might be podcast chatty style content that doesn't actually even end up living anywhere else other than on these fan accounts. Or it might be, going to shows and planting stuff that is meant to engage people. And I say engage in a polite way because sometimes maybe it's meant to piss people off. Sometimes maybe it's meant to make people laugh. Sometimes maybe it's meant to make people cry. And we're working more and more now across different tours and live stuff. We worked with 40 different artists across Glastonbury Festival last year, making content just to seed out into the world, whether that's on their own fan accounts or into our network of accounts. So, I'm really excited about that. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. Other things that I think are going to continue to change in trend, I think just talking more and more on that clipping thing. I think fans are just going to take more and more power into their own hands. I think Fred again's always a good barometer as to marketing, right? He's just moving
Yeah.
from strength to strength, and clipping's always been a big part of his strategy. But I think with live streaming and Twitch being such a big part of his most recent campaign, and therefore he's just putting content out in like hour, 2 hour chunks, and then that's been eaten up, shredded, put out into the internet by his fan base himself. He's letting them do the heavy lifting. I think that's going to happen more and more. You see that with all these big Twitch streamers and podcasters and comedians where, the fans are chewing it up and spinning it out themselves, Sorry, were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say that clipping is the thing that you started to creep in towards the end of the last year in terms of some sort of strategy people were talking about, and what is the strength of that? Because is that the fact that it's giving again fans the power?
Yeah, in a way, I think it's a natural evolution of the fan account space, right? And the fan account space was almost an evolution of the influencer space in a way as well, right? And I think the clipping thing is it's like people are almost trying to go as cheap, as fast, as big, as quick as possible. And I think that is why there are companies out there that, will tell you that they'll flood 20,000 pieces of UGC onto your content within 24 hours. And, that sort of thing, I think is going to become more and more popular. I want to be really clear, like we as a business are going in the opposite direction, in this world of like AI generated content, in this world of like phone farms just blasting content out. Although that like mentality is similar to ours, where we're trying to use the algorithm against itself in a way, right? And try and use discovery and awareness, get more discovery and awareness using the algorithm. We're still doing it with a lot of heart and a lot more strategy than I think these kind of spray and pray mentalities that are coming out of other businesses. So, I think it's a natural evolution of where we've been. You only have to read any sort of like media report or whatever else and really start to question, okay, is just kind of lots and lots of short form content actually going to move the needle? Without a proper strategy, no. And that is where we kind of, I guess link a bit more into the other stuff that I'm excited about for going into 2026. It's not new to talk about direct to fan. I actually did go back and listen to our podcast from a year ago, which,
Right.
for anyone who hates listening back to their own voice, listening to a whole like hour of talking is a lot. I loved it every time you spoke, Joe, because I got a slight break from my own voice. But
Thank you.
that being said, I touched on right at the end. I threw on direct to fan. There's some great companies, OpenStage, Lalo, Cirque, so onwards. I think that space has only become more and more important. But I think something that I am dubious about going into this year is how much people are kind of seeing it as one or the other. And I think that direct to fan and social, i.e. top of funnel to mid funnel and mid funnel to bottom funnel, need to be working together, both from a kind of like just even the fact that it's not really a funnel, it's a cycle. As I've already said with that Alex Warren example, if you can use the bottom of the funnel content, bottom of the funnel conversations to kind of surface up to the top, you're going to get more people coming down, number one. Number two, if you're looking at just constantly trying to convert your existing audience and deepen their relationship, there's terminal velocity on that. Because if you're not making new fans, then eventually you're going to run out of fans to be converting into super fans, right? And the third thing is creatively, I just think ultimately right now, people don't want to sign up to mailers. We're having to carrot and stick fans into signing up to mailers by going like, you're going to miss out on the pre-sale if you don't, or, oh, we'll give you 10% off merch if you do. Why can't we get into a space where, a content team like mine can collaborate more efficiently with direct to fan focused companies and make the stuff that's going out there be as exciting and, to use that word authentic, but in a slightly different definition that we said it, make sure it's all singing from the same hymn sheet. Why can't we make it where we're putting stuff out on a mailer blast or an SMS blast or wherever else it exists, on a Lalo blast, whatever, that actually the content itself is why people are signing up.
Right.
And, maybe that's starting to happen. Now we've got Substack and that's becoming more popular, and Charlie XCX started a Substack. So I'm sure plenty of other artists are going to follow, right?
So that's an interesting development, really, which is what people really like from the artist side, especially about direct to fan, is that they own that connection, and that does then sort of silo you off into an increasing number of platforms, but it's away from social media. But you're saying you can sort of have your cake and eat it, and you can have that that sort of quality of content that we associate with social media over there on those platforms as well, and it's a full process all the way through.
100%. I mean, ultimately, if you're just getting people to sign up to a mailer because it's the checkbox of what your marketing campaign tells you to do, how is that any different from when a few years ago people were doing TikTok just because they were being told to do TikTok?
Mm,
It's we're finding ourselves in a similar space right now. And I think there are some artists out there who are doing really great work with it. And I think it's very important. But I think it's got to be far more creative, far more collaborative than I think we're allowing ourselves to be right now. And ultimately, we're ending up in a position where now artist teams have a whole other platform and sense of thinking to think about, right? So I think,
mm.
again, the teams that are out there working in that space, we've got to be super collaborative. I think that's really important.
You mentioned early discoverability, and this is an increasing sort of focus point for so many people because there's just this proliferation of platforms, of music, of artists, of everything, and everybody's falling into their niche. So it's in some ways that moment of discovery is perhaps even more valuable than ever, and yet it's harder than ever. So, what are you spotting there in terms of trends of what people are doing and what they're saying they need in that sort of for that
Yeah.
moment of discovery?
Yeah, totally. I think that I always try to map things onto kind of that visual diagram of the funnel, right? And we've spoken a bit about the top with like the clipping and the fan accounts and so onwards. We've spoken a bit about the kind of top mid in terms of like the content that an artist's own socials is putting out. And at the bottom there, or mid bottom even, you've got the kind of direct to fan stuff and so onwards. But I think what's really cutting through and what people are really starting to do more of is IRL stuff, right? I think
Right.
collaborations with either IRL communities, whether that's kind of Diplo doing his run club, or whether it's more opportunities that are in the kind of listening party, fan meetup space, so onwards. And I think that, that's a space that we're really, really targeting more and more over the course of this year. We've done bits and pieces of it here and there by accident, whether that's with the Wombats at Reading last year. We did it where if you were wearing a Wombats t-shirt, you could go to like a secret area of Reading and we play the new single on a Bluetooth speaker. Or, there's another artist campaign that we worked across where a bunch of young fans were talking in the Discord server about how they were a bit too nervous to travel into the city on their own because they didn't have friends who wanted to go. So we kind of chose a bunch of towns around Manchester, Birmingham, and London that people could meet up at the train station and travel in together. So these kind of like in-person things are really key. And there's a really key signifier there. People are doing these massive installations and activations with great companies that are like, absolutely blowing people's socks off. And that's really important. But there's a key signifier in the two examples I just gave there. The artist wasn't even involved. Those
Yeah.
were things that were completely fan led in a way. And, we want to really target more and more of a space where we can make the noise that's happening around an artist and during an artist campaign continue to be happening without them even necessarily needing to be the ones to push it all the time. Right? And I mean, it just comes back to those community basics. There's 4 stages to a community, in my opinion. Content being distributed from artist into fan base. And then the second stage being fan base to back to the artist and vice versa. So there's more of a conversation. That's replies, that's duetting videos, that's engaging with UGC, so onwards. The third thing is creating those community spaces where fans are connected and talking to each other. And then the fourth is that amplification. That's how I've always looked at social media. And now we're starting to put that on top of the IRL space as well. And if anything, it makes more sense for social media to be more involved in that space because ultimately that Discord fan meetup train station thing wouldn't have happened if we weren't listening on social media.
Mm.
We've had to signpost that out on social media. Fans are connecting on social media to meet up. It's essentially a content shoot in its own right while it's happening. And then,
Yeah.
maybe we're doing a bit of clipping and seeding as well to get content about it happening out there. So I do think those kind of things where people can feel genuine, honest connection and community with people is only going to be more and more important.
Again, that was one of the sort of emergent trends last year, which was this, building these community-focused events, and yeah, like you say, a lot of them were album launches that were done really thoughtfully, with lots of extra stuff to do for fans that were in their wheelhouse. And what, I'm always thinking about emerging artists who might be listening to this and saying, well, perhaps I'm not quite ready to work with something yet, or whoever, but they want to sort of bring some of these things like that down to their level. Um, is there, is there a sort of barrier you have to pass in terms of making it special or something for those kind of community-oriented things, or can it be really, really really basic and simple for even a DIY artist to do?
Oh, absolutely. I think everything we've ever done is scalable in a way,
Mm,
right? And I'm sure, we work with some of the biggest artists in the world. We work with Jennifer Lopez, we work with Billie Eilish, we work with Lewis Capaldi and so onwards. Of course, when I'm naturally talking about our experiences in our recent campaigns, it's going to sound massive. But not only do we work with artists like early doors, but I think so much of what we do is scalable in some format. Because trust me, even for some of those artists, the idea probably started as something that was even bigger than they could possibly do, and we've had to scale it back
mm,
in some way. So,
mm.
whether that's the fan account thing, is that just kind of like getting a friend of yours who wants some social media experience on their CV to just run a bit more of a memes account dedicated to you, or whether it's just posting out clips of you live, like, sure, like, having that kind of community around you, that's really key. Or, if you've got that one super fan who really wants to get involved. I mean, look at Youngblood. I think, we've been really fortunate to be involved with working with him, and his team are an absolute marketing powerhouse. And Jules, who runs a lot of his digital strategy, started as a super fan that their fan identified and was like, you need to come and live on the tour bus with us and just make all this shit happen. And now he's just gone from strength to strength. So, whether it's that and, with the IRL stuff, I mean, one of the IRL things we did just before the Christmas break was we had Leanne Lawrence making Christmas wreaths with fans. She literally just wasn't even like some super sciencey data play. It was essentially she hit up a bunch of her biggest fans who've been supporters of her directly on DM and was like, "Hey, like I'm heading to this pub on this date, and I'd love for you to come. And I'm going to do a wreath making class. And I'm going to teach fans how to make wreaths, and it's going to be a really nice opportunity to hang out." And we produced the event for that, and we produced a lot of the social strategy and content for that. And there's no reason why with someone even with 20 fans, among 200 or 2,000 or 2 million, there's no reason why they couldn't do that, you know?
Mm, mm. Um, let's look at for a moment at again thinking about the shifts. You've mentioned a couple of times about how perhaps, and this is understandable, especially if you're at the more DIY end of things, that you fall into the perhaps a trap of saying, well, this is what you're supposed to do, and so I'm going to roll out a campaign that sort of ticks these boxes, and that's completely understandable, particularly if, as I say, for emerging artists. What are the things are you sort of spotting that are perhaps a little bit legacy stuff that is continuing, but all the stuff you've mentioned is quite nimble and fresh and fan oriented and and sort of quite bespoke to the artist. So what are the other kind of, I don't want to say mistakes, but what are people doing that perhaps are not maximizing the impact that they could have at the moment?
I think just copying other people. I think, just naturally looking around at what everyone else is doing and either trying to do that and it not working out. And then you kind of like just keep picking yourself up and copying the next artist and so onwards. And, that's the first thing is just copying artists over and over again. I think if you're doing that, you're just going to end up in a position where you don't really look like anything. You're this kind of silhouette that has been pulled in so many different directions that it's just got blurrier and blurrier to the point you're just fading into the background.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I think ultimately the thing I would say to a brand new artist is have a space for people to be discovering you and have a space for when people have discovered you, they go deeper, you know? And ultimately
Mm.
that maps onto what I was saying earlier, that social media teams and direct to fan teams need to work closer and closer. I think ultimately, if you can be using this kind of atomization, this algorithmic recommended stuff that's going on in the internet, and use that to your advantage as much as possible to get discovered by 10, then 100, then 1,000 people, but you are actually pushing them to somewhere that, as you said earlier, you own that data, you own that fan relationship. I think it's really key. I think that's really, it doesn't even matter how big of an artist. We could talk about the biggest artist in the world. I think that avenue of essentially get discovered and then get that new discovery to go deeper is essentially the basics of marketing. And I think you've just got to find your avenue to do that in a scalable way.
The other thing that is in this mix, but not everywhere, but it can be in this mix, is influencer marketing or the use of influencers. Whether that we're talking about these sort of the ones that straddle, over culture, or the ones that are within these niches. Um, you're talking about the sort of creation of really enticing bits of content or situations or experiences that sort of feed into this diffused network of people who are fans or maybe creeping into super fan territory. What about the use of influencer marketing and influencers in 2026? Is the role changing?
Yeah, the role's definitely changing. I mean, I'll caveat immediately, it's not a space that we work in. There's two things people always presume we do, which we don't, and it's influencers and ads. We don't do either of those things. But my opinion on the influencer space is, yeah, of course it's changed. We spoke a year ago about the importance of tastemakers, and I think that influencer tastemaker space has only converged. I think the days of somebody paying £10,000 to whack a song on top of a video of them brushing their teeth in the morning, or as I said earlier, talking about their bowel movements,
Yeah.
that is that going to move the needle? No. And therefore, is that where people are going to put their budget into? I goddamn hope not. If we know it's not where they're putting what's actually moving the needle. And ultimately, where it is moving is people who do have, realistically, everything we've just mapped onto marketing and communities and so onwards, real good creators are doing that themselves, right? And if a creator has got a genuine engaged community, as opposed to the word audience, because it sounds a little bit more engaged, they're not just standing there and watching and applauding, they're actually engaged within the community. That's the sort of people you want to tap into. And those people naturally, if you're going to look at Anthony Fantano is kind of one of the great examples of a tastemaker. People that are so lively in his Discord and Reddit and his mailers and so onwards and all these other spaces where he kind of owns his community a little bit more. That's super key. And, all the way down to, there's a really good friend of the company, a guy called Christian Sayers, who is a really amazing content producer, but ultimately also runs live music nights and also runs these things called songwriting circles where he just gets artists together to just, I think, 8, 9, 10 artists in a room, just kind of playing away. I don't know how many followers he's got off the top of my head, but you probably look at his channels and one thing, he's a mega influencer by any means. But do voices like Christian's matter if you're trying to start to move the needle to tap into certain types of audience? Absolutely. So yeah, I think maybe the days of like an influencer as we've come to know them have got less important. Again, I say this as someone who doesn't work in influencer marketing, so I'm not an expert, but I do think and can say wholeheartedly that people who have a really engaged community, they are important. And, I think again, there's someone called Sophie-Anne Lane who, has been in our industry for as long as I have. We interned together and, has managed artists like Glass Animals and Confidence Man over the years. She runs a WhatsApp group channel for like a book club in the music industry. And I think ultimately, if you're trying to engage young in music industry people, trying to find a way to get, if I've just dropped a book about my experience in the music industry, that's a WhatsApp group channel that I should definitely be trying to get into, because that audience makes sense for me to tap into. And therefore, is Sophie in her own right an influencer? I guess so. And yeah, so I maybe getting a bit heady here, but this is where we tap into Yancey Strickler's dark forest theory, which I'm sure you're more than familiar with. But for those at home, essentially this whole idea is how, when you look at a forest during the daytime, you've got waterfalls and you've got all these amazing, beautiful, colorful trees, and you've got these deer and these birds and all these things happening. And you think, wow, this forest is really alive. But then at nighttime, you can't see any of that. And you're like, oh, the forest is dead. But it's not. It's all there. You just can't see it. And the idea essentially is that we kind of, the dead internet theory about how AI is talking to AI and so on was, which that's one to go and Google. I can't be asked to explain that one. But, there's all these theories that are very negative, but there are theories that the internet is very much alive, but they're happening in spaces where you can't see them. WhatsApp group chats, Facebook groups, private Instagrams, close friend stories, Discord servers, mailers. And I think that, yes, the internet is becoming more and more of a dark forest. It doesn't mean it's dead. So to try and swing this all the way back to the question you actually asked me, rather than throwing stuff in there for no reason, does the influencer's position in that paradigm change? Yes, it does. And does something that a marketeer or an artist looking to employ or engage an influencer therefore change, and the metric for success they're looking for change? Absolutely, because the whole damn thing has changed.
Yeah, and I guess it's that idea of the shift of the internet and how people use it. If you speak to, well, I'm at an age now where I can say young people. So when you speak to young people, they they don't. Yes, they have social media accounts, but actually, where they really get, well, they tell me at least, where they get the sort of richness and their experiences from these, dark channels, where WhatsApp groups and things, Snapchat groups and things like that. And I guess it's about reframing what an influencer is, right? It's like the old type is gone, or their influence is very focused in a specific way in a certain area, and you may not be able to access it unless you are part of it in the first place. Which is kind of a complicated way to think about it, but from your perspective, probably makes them more useful, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're so right. It's almost like, because the word influencer kind of died for a while there, right? Because people didn't like it. They wanted to be called a
Yeah,
creator instead. But almost like the word influencer, it maybe is a bit more applicable again, because you don't have to necessarily be creating something to have influence, you know?
yeah,
And I
right, yeah.
think that, um, for example, whenever I'm checking out a new artist, I don't even necessarily, and by this I mean to kind of get an idea of where they are in their career, I'm not necessarily looking at how many followers they've got. I'm looking at who's following them. And by that,
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked in the music industry now for 10 plus years. A lot of the people who I'm friends with on Instagram are A&Rs or industry executives alike, and so onwards. Therefore, if I'm on an artist's Instagram and they're being followed by, some hyper cool record labels A&R, I'm like, oh, damn, okay. So they must be like, starting to pick up a bit of traction if that's the
Yeah,
sort
there's
of
something
people who are
there. Yeah,
following them.
yeah.
So therefore, even, those friends of mine, are they kind of influencers in a way, because they are
Mm,
influencing my
mm,
opinion? And then, we go all the way back to the beginning here where, with fan accounts and with UGC and with essentially you offer over your music, you offer over your content, whatever you're offering out into the world, and the fan base and the internet rips it up and kind of does what it wants with it. I think that every single thing we've spoken about, that kind of mirrors onto. And I think the only other thing I'll throw onto the end of that answer as well is, first off, Joe, I'm 29 and I say young people. So I definitely think, a lot of people can get
Good,
away with saying young people, but
good.
young people who I talk to and have done for the past 4 or 5 years of running this company, one of the most interesting things to me are how much, like, the idea of being a content creator and content consumer for my generation. I am the last year of being a millennial and the first year of being a Gen Z, so I get to pick and choose depending on what room I'm in. We
Mm,
we are content creators and consumers at the same time. It's kind of a thing when I was 5, 10 years ago, you just posted everything you did on Instagram, and if someone challenged me and went like, why are you doing that? It's like, well, that's what I do. Whereas,
mm,
the younger people who I've worked with over the course of doing this company, because, we still have a really great young creative team. They typically will probably have 200 followers on a private account because
mm,
they are not trying to be an influencer. If they're trying to be a creator and influencer, then all the more to them. And, no one's necessarily looking down on them, I don't think. But it's almost like, if you're not trying to be a creator, therefore, what is the purpose of you having a public Instagram? What is the
mm.
purpose of you having 4,000 Instagram followers? What is the reason for that? Those people aren't your friends. So why should they be seeing what you're doing with your life? Does that
Right,
make
right.
sense?
No, no, completely. And it brings me on actually to one of my final questions, which is about platforms, because I do feel over the, I don't know, the past 5 to 10 years, maybe a bit more, a lot of the shifts in marketing have been, in terms of perception, platform led. Like, oh, Discord's hot now. Like, what do I need to know about Discord? And I'll try that out. Or, and before that we had Snapchat or whatever, and people, for, and maybe they're still doing this for a long time, sort of try and build strategies based around what they perceive a platform that is either new or new to them can do for them. Is that something that you see perhaps slowing down a bit?
It's so interesting you say that, because I was thinking just before we jumped on, what are the key differences between, it's a weird thing, by the way, to do a podcast a year later, because, I don't want to trip myself up by saying just the same things that I said a year ago, but naturally a lot has changed. And so I was thinking before, what has changed for us as a company? And, we're 4 years old right now. And I think as a business, in our first year, we were trying to be given opportunities. In our second year, we were trying to be taken seriously. In our third year, we were trying to rip up the rule book and just change everything and show that we could innovate. And I think we did that in a really exciting way. Again, go and look at the Music Ally campaign of the year stuff we did. And there's a reason why you guys were so kind to name us Agency of the Year. We've gone and done things differently. And not saying that we're going to just halt the brakes on innovation, but I do think going into year 4, and by the way, on Wednesday, it's our company away day. So I'm in a very heady space trying to think, okay, what is our vision for this year anyway? It's actually about being more defined and more selective. So it's completely in line with what you've just said, really. It's like, rather than innovation for innovation's sake, rather than always looking for new platforms, so onwards, it's actually, how do we really deepen what we've already got? That being said, I think some of the platforms that I'm most excited about, again, those direct-to-fan spaces we've already spoken about, Substacks, or obviously just becoming a bigger and bigger part of the conversation. I think that's a space we're going to continue to see evolve more and more. I think every time I jump on a call with a label, there's a new tool in that space that is interesting. But I think, if anything, the tools I'm most excited to be experimenting with now are people who are companies that help us understand what's happening better. And by that, I mean analytics platforms and research tools and anything that kind of just helps us get an idea of it. I had a call with a team last week, and they're working on something that essentially, kind of similar to a co-brand, I guess, which, is definitely has been a buzzword platform for a little minute now as well. But similar to a co-brand, but as opposed to kind of getting an idea of all of the analytics of content that's being posted about you, it's more about the content that's not been posted about you. It's encouraging fans to share content from shows and so onwards, and give artist teams access to that, which again goes all the way back to the fact that fans just want to be included. But you're getting an idea and you're getting analytics on content that fans are sharing, even if they haven't posted it. So yeah, I just want to understand fans deeper. And there's a very, I can't remember if it's left brain or right brain, but it's one side of your brain that's very creative with that and understanding the lore and understanding who they are and so onwards. But we're going into this year trying to be a little bit more the other side of the brain, a little bit less limbic, a little bit more neocortex, in the sense of really understanding the logic and the systems of what makes people tick, and therefore being able to make it a little bit more able to be replicated. Not replicated in the sense that we're copy and pasting our work, but replicated in terms of the results that we're able to get.
And what you've spoken a lot there about the things that excite you in terms of what you're able to do, the possibilities, and the sort of technologies and stuff that you can use. But so as a final thing, then, when you're looking ahead as maybe a sort of a more personal in terms of you and the company, what are you looking forward to about moving into 2026 in terms of what are some milestones that you'd like to hit that would sort of bring all those values and the approaches together that we've just discussed in a way that feels satisfactory to you?
Music Ally's Agency of the Year 2 years in a row.
You can't bribe me. I'm not involved in that.
I'm kidding. Slightly. But no, genuinely, I think I've touched on a few different things here already. We want to really go inwards on the work that we're already doing. We want to make it really kind of robust. So therefore, to be able to come through this year and know that some of the great innovation work that we've done and some of the things that we've done to really try and test systems over the past 4 years of being a company, we're able to deliver on a more consistent basis. And that's not to imply that the work that we're doing is currently inconsistent, but I want to know that, we've got a methodology that is able to kind of turn up and really supercharge what artists are doing. That's something that I do believe we already have, but I want to be able to prove that over the next 12 months. And I think ultimately, we're going for a bit of a rebrand as a company right now. I literally just signed off on our new logo an hour before we started recording this, and maybe I'll have posted it by the time. Yeah. Unfortunately, this isn't a visual podcast, so otherwise maybe I'll get up on my screen. But we just got a new logo. We're maybe going for a bit of an identity crisis in the sense of who are we? What does it mean to be a 4-year-old company as opposed to being a 1-year-old company? I said before, Joe, I'm 29, or that's 30, so of course I'm having my own crisis anyway. Right. But my point is, we started as the TikTok team. We were a couple of kids that people trusted to run their TikTok when everyone was scared of it. And then, a very good friend of mine actually said to me, you don't want to be the TikTok team because what if the industry's relationship with TikTok changes? Where does that leave you? And we started trying to push more, with a content team. And then thank God, because then Universal had their big falling out with TikTok. Imagine where that would have left us if we were seen as the TikTok team. And then, we've pushed more and more into, I guess, being the viral team. We've had some massive multi-million plays for Lewis Capaldi, and we've had some other really massive viral moments. But now in a world where people don't just want viral, they want genuine fandom. It's like, are we the fan company? Is that who we are? Are we the team who just genuinely are and understand fans? Maybe, yeah, that's maybe who we are. Or are we the fun company? It's one of the two, I think. Are we the company that, if you actually just want a campaign that's fun and interesting and creative, we're the people you come to. Because, there's plenty of other people out there who do similar things to what we do. And the thing that I think I picked up the most when people have worked with those other companies and then come to us is that it's just a very creative, not box ticking, very, very like individual way of working. And I think to actually answer your question, I've just had an existential crisis in audio form.
Yeah, thanks for that.
What what I would actually like to try and achieve is, I think, to solidify the fact that yes, we're a young company, but we're quite serious. And the results that I think we've been getting have been speaking for themselves recently. There are also some really amazing campaigns that we've done that are NDA'd. So some of the shit we've done that I'm like most gassed about, can't even talk about. So hopefully those NDAs will kind of expire in the next 12 months and we can talk about that. But I just want to be seen as a serious artist marketing business that people come to when they want to build a world and invite people into it. And that can come through content, social, IRL, fan engagement, so many different spaces. That's what pumps me up and something that I get to ride my bike into the office every day being excited to get to do.
Well, there you go. And on that note, I think we've covered all the bases there. Liam, what I will do is I will put I'll put a link to something beneath the podcast, and we've got an email address there as well that people can get in touch with you if they like what they hear or they want to just sound you out about life, the universe, and everything. And well, you've already dangled a carrot there, so we might have to do this again next year to hear about those NDA projects. First of all, and secondly, to see if this, I think, sort of meta prediction that will artists have been making content from their toilets? There's only one way to find out. We'll have to check in next year and see if that became a pattern of behavior or not. But Liam James Ward from Something Something, thanks as ever for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, mate. See you in 2027.
There we go. Thank you to Liam for joining us for the second year in a row. And we will, as promised at the end there, see if we can wrangle him back onto the podcast in 2027. Don't forget that there are links to Something Something, an email contact address if you want to get in touch with them, and probably some links to various different examples of their work in the text that surrounds this podcast. If you found it useful, please do share it on with somebody else who you think will get something out of it. And if you want to get in touch with me, I would, of course, love to hear from you. You can email me on joe@musically.com. That's joe@musically.com. That's it. Thanks for listening. I've been Joe Sparrow. You have been you. And until next time on Music Ally Focus, farewell.